The air was thick with the scent of beer, sweat, and cheap perfume inside the sold-out venue. It was November 14th, 1980, and Queen was in the midst of their The Game tour, electrifying a crowd of 20,000 souls. The energy was at a fever pitch, a palpable current of excitement that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the iconic stadium. Freddie Mercury, in its iconic black and white harlequin leotard, was a force of nature. He commanded the stage with a swagger that was part rock god, part ringmaster, his voice soaring effortlessly through the anthemic chorus of Another One Bites the Dust. The crowd was eating it up, a massive unified entity of adoring fans. But amidst this chaotic symphony of adoration, something was about to happen that would test not only Freddie's legendary stage presence, but his very character. From somewhere in the middle section, a loud, slurred voice cut through the music and the crowd noise like a knife. It was jarring, ugly, and completely out of place. "Freddie, you ain't nothing but a fake!" The voice belonged to Bob the Bloke Henderson, a burly 35-year-old steelworker from Sheffield who had been drinking since lunch. He had a reputation as a professional troublemaker, the kind of guy who thought celebrities were all soft and needed to be taken down a peg. He didn't buy a ticket to see Queen. He bought it to prove a twisted point. In his alcohol-fueled mind, he had convinced himself that Freddie Mercury was nothing more than a flamboyant showman who had never faced a real challenge. "You hear me, Mercury? You're a phony!" Mike shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Freddie stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused by the sudden silence, slowly trailed off, their instruments falling quiet. 20,000 people turned to look at this man, swaying precariously in his seat, pointing a belligerent finger at the stage. Freddie's first reaction was pure showmanship. He tried to handle it with humor, a well-placed quip to deflect the negative energy and get the show back on track.
"Well, darling, hello to you too," Freddie said, his voice dripping with playful sarcasm. "Looks like we have a music critic in the house tonight." The audience laughed, a nervous, expectant sound. Most hecklers, once acknowledged by Freddie, would either sit down, embarrassed, or be quickly removed by security. But the bloke wasn't most hecklers. "Don't you darling me, boy," he yelled back, his words slurring with venom. "I'm talking to you. You think you're so tough with your fancy clothes and your singing? Why don't you come down here and prove you're a real man?" The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. This wasn't just drunken nonsense anymore. It was a direct challenge, and everyone could feel the tension. Freddie stood at the microphone, his famous grin gone, replaced by a steely, focused glare. The band members exchanged uneasy glances. Security guards, already on alert, started to move toward the man's section, their faces set in grim determination. But before they could get there, Freddie raised a hand, a clear, unmistakable gesture for them to stop. "Sir," Freddie said, his voice no longer playful but dangerously calm, "you paid good money to be here tonight, just like everyone else. How about we all just enjoy the music?" "I don't want to enjoy your music," the man yelled back. "I want to see if you're anything more than a mama's boy who prances around for the cameras." That last comment seemed to strike a chord. Freddie's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. The crowd was getting restless. Some people were booing the heckler, others were shouting for security to throw him out. The joyful energy had curdled into something tense and ugly. What happened next surprised everyone, including his own band and crew. Instead of signaling for security or ignoring the man, Freddie set down his microphone and started walking toward the edge of the stage. "You want to know if I'm a real man?" Freddie said, his voice carrying clearly through the massive sound system. "You think I'm just some pretty boy who can't handle himself?" The arena went dead silent. 20,000 people held their breath, unsure of what they were about to witness. Freddie looked directly at the bloke and said,
Well, friend, I'll tell you what. Why don't you come up here and we'll settle this like gentlemen?"
The audience erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps. Some were shouting, "Don't do it, Freddie!" Others were screaming their support. Security guards were in a frenzy, and even Freddie's manager, Jim Beach, reportedly had to be held back in the wings. But Freddie wasn't done. "Come on up here," Freddie repeated, gesturing toward the stage with a theatrical sweep of his hand. "You want to prove something? Let's prove it. But I'll tell you what, we're not going to fight like animals. We're going to settle this the way real men settle things." The bloke, emboldened by the alcohol and the attention, began pushing his way toward the stage, knocking people aside. "Damn right we are," he slurred. Security tried to intercept him, but Freddie waved them off. "Let him come," Freddie commanded. "Let him come up here." When the bloke finally made it to the stage, stumbling slightly as he clambered over the barrier, the entire arena was in a state of chaotic anticipation. People were on their feet, some screaming, some trying to get closer to see the confrontation. Freddie walked over to where the man was standing, and for a long moment, the two men faced each other. Freddie in his immaculate leotard, calm and controlled. The man, sweaty, disheveled, and clearly intoxicated, but still radiating aggression. "All right, friend," Freddie said, his voice smooth and confident. "You want to prove who's the real man here? I've got a proposition for you." "Bring it on," the man slurred. "Here's what we're going to do," Freddie said, a devilish grin spreading across his face. "We're going to have ourselves a singing contest. You and me, right here, right now. Winner takes all."
The suggestion was so unexpected, so completely different from what anyone thought was going to happen, that it took a moment for the crowd to process it. A singing contest? This angry, belligerent drunk versus the legendary Freddie Mercury? Then a few nervous chuckles broke out. Within seconds, the entire arena was filled with laughter and applause. The tension had vanished, replaced by an infectious sense of surreal amusement. The bloke, however, was not amused. "I don't want to sing with you. I want to fight you," he protested. "Well, that's too bad," Freddie retorted, his grin widening. "Because this is my stage. These are my people, and we do things my way here. You want to prove you're tougher than me? Then prove you can do what I do. Sing." Freddie gestured to Brian May, his longtime friend and guitarist, who was watching this whole scene with his mouth agape. "Brian, give the man a microphone," Freddie called out. "And boys," he said to Roger Taylor and John Deacon, "let's give our new friend here a chance to show us what he's got."
The band, still in a state of shock, but following Freddie's lead, prepared to play. The bloke was handed a microphone, and suddenly, the center of attention in a way he never expected, he looked around the arena with a mixture of confusion and panic. What do you want me to sing?" he mumbled. "Whatever you want, dear boy," Freddie said magnanimously. "This is your moment. 20,000 people are waiting to hear what you've got to say." What followed was both hilarious and oddly touching. The bloke, clearly out of his element but trapped by his own bravado, attempted to belt out a mangled, off-key version of My Way, apparently the only song he could think of in his alcohol-fogged brain. He was off-key, forgot half the words, and swayed so much that Freddie had to subtly steady him to keep him from falling over.
But here's the remarkable part. Instead of the audience booing or laughing at him, something else happened. As the man struggled through the song, clearly embarrassed and vulnerable, the crowd began to cheer him on. "You got this! Keep going! Sing it, mate!" Freddie, standing beside him, began clapping along and encouraging him. When he forgot the words, Freddie would whisper them to him. When he started to give up, Freddie put a supportive hand on his back and urged him to continue. By the time the bloke finished his stumbling rendition, something had changed in the room.
The angry, belligerent drunk who had come to cause trouble had become, for a few minutes, just another person trying his best at something difficult. The audience gave him a thunderous standing ovation, not because he sang well, but because he tried, and because Freddie had created a space where even a hostile heckler could be transformed into someone worth cheering for.
"That was beautiful, Mike," Freddie said, genuinely seeming to mean it. "That took real courage." The man, now clearly emotional and no longer aggressive, looked around in stunned disbelief. I can't believe they're clapping for me." "Of course they are, dear boy," Freddie said, his voice soft with sincerity. "You just did something brave. You got up here and tried something new in front of 20,000 people. That's more than most folks ever do. Now," Freddie said, turning to the crowd with a knowing wink, "I suppose it's my turn. But instead of showing off with one of his big hits, instead of demonstrating the vast difference in talent between himself and the heckler, Freddie did something that showed his true character. He sang Love of My Life, a simple, poignant ballad, and he made sure that the bloke sang along with him, giving him harmony parts and making him feel like a true part of the performance."
The two men stood on stage together, the legendary rock star and a humbled construction worker, singing a beautiful ballad while 20,000 people joined in. When the song ended, Freddie turned to the man with genuine warmth. "Mike, I want to ask you something," Freddie said, his voice quiet. "What made you so angry tonight? What's really bothering you?" The question, asked with such sincere concern, seemed to break something open in the man. In front of 20,000 people, this tough steelworker from Sheffield started to cry. I lost my job last month," he said into the microphone, his voice shaking. "My wife, she left me. I wanted someone to pay attention to me. I wanted to matter." The arena went completely silent. Freddie put his arm around Mike's shoulders. "You matter, darling. You matter to me, and you matter to every person in this room. We all have times when we feel lost and angry, but you don't have to tear other people down to build yourself up."
What Freddie did next became the stuff of rock and roll legend. "Ladies and gentlemen," Freddie said to the audience, "I want to tell you about the real courage I've seen tonight. It wasn't Mike coming up here to cause trouble. It was Mike admitting when he was hurting and asking for help. That takes more guts than any fight ever could." Freddie then announced that he was personally going to help Mike find a job, that he would be put in touch with someone from the tour crew, and if anyone in the audience owned a construction company and needed a hard worker, they should talk to his people after the show. "Because that's what we do for each other," Freddie said. "We help. We don't tear down, we build up." The bloke stayed for the rest of the concert, sitting on the side of the stage, occasionally joining in on songs when Freddie invited him. By the end of the night, he had gone from being the show's biggest disruption to being part of its most memorable moments. As the final notes of We Are the Champions faded, the crowd's applause was different. It was less a roar of rock and roll frenzy and more irreverent, emotional sound.
3 construction company owners approached Queen's management after the show with job offers for Mike. He chose one, moved to London, and worked there for the next 15 years until his retirement. But more importantly, the story of what happened that night spread throughout the rock community and beyond. It became a legendary example of how to handle conflict with grace, wisdom, and compassion. Other performers began talking about Freddie's handling of the Heckler situation, finding creative ways to turn negative energy into positive experiences. Freddie showed us that every heckler is just a human being having a bad day, said Roger Taylor in a later interview. He turned an enemy into a friend in front of 20,000 people. That's not just good showmanship, that's good humanity. For Freddie, the incident was meaningful because it reinforced his belief that his role as a performer was about more than just entertainment. I realized that night that I have a responsibility, Freddie told his manager afterward. When someone comes to my show, whether they're a fan or a heckler, I have an opportunity to make their life a little better. That's not something I take lightly.
The entire incident was captured on bootleg recordings that have become some of the most treasured audio documents among collectors. But it's not just the music that people value. It's Freddie's handling of the confrontation, his wisdom, and his compassion. You can hear Freddie thinking in real time, choosing love over conflict, understanding over judgment. It's a masterclass in human decency. The story of Freddie and the bloke became a parable about how to handle conflict in any situation. Instead of meeting aggression with aggression, Freddie chose to meet it with curiosity, compassion, and creativity. He turned a potential fight into a teaching moment, a hostile confrontation into a healing experience, and an enemy into a friend. Freddie proved that night that you don't defeat your enemies by fighting them. You defeat them by loving them until they become your friends. Today, the story of Freddie and the bloke is taught in conflict resolution courses and cited by therapists as an example of how to de-escalate tense situations through empathy and understanding. The bloke, before his death in 2012, gave several interviews about that night. In each one, he credited Freddie with saving his life by showing him that there were better ways to deal with pain than lashing out at others. He could have humiliated me in front of all those people, Mike said in his final interview. Instead, he helped me find my dignity. He turned the worst night of my life into the beginning of a better life. The confrontation between Freddie and the bloke reminds us that behind every act of aggression is usually a person in pain. And it shows us that the strongest response to hostility isn't more hostility. It's understanding, compassion, and the willingness to see the humanity in everyone. Freddie could have had the man thrown out, could have made jokes at his expense, could have used his power and position to humiliate him. Instead, he chose to help him, to heal him, and to show 20,000 people what real strength looks like. That's why nearly 45 years later, people still talk about the night Freddie turned a heckler into a friend. It wasn't just great entertainment, it was great humanity. And in a world that often seems divided by anger and misunderstanding, maybe that's exactly the kind of story we need to hear. If this incredible story of turning conflict into compassion moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel.